a Ligonier Valley resident, a 1966 graduate of Indiana University of Pennsylvania, where he received a bachelor's degree and a second lieutenant's commission in the United States Army. He served in the Vietnam War as an infantry officer from the autumn of 1967 until Christmas 1968. Tonight he will share his experiences advising an infantry battalion of the 9th Regiment, 5th Infantry Division of the South Vietnamese Army before, during, and after the 1968 Tet Offensive. He has also been a platoon leader in the 101st Airborne Division and a company commander in the 82nd Airborne Division, and served overseas in Korea and Egypt and as an officer on exchange to the British Army in England. After graduate business study, he enjoyed a second career as a Fortune 500 business executive. Now Monty and his wife Marlena are retired to a cottage beside a trout stream in the Ligonier Valley. When not fly fishing, he teaches 7th graders to raise brook trout from eggs and then release them into the wild in the Trout Unlimited Trout in the Classroom program. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Monty Murty.
Thank you very much, Shirley. Please join me in thanking the committee of the 21st Annual Historic Photo Show for their outstanding achievement documenting for history's sake the faces of the Ligonier Valley, veterans of Vietnam and the Cold War. Our committee members are our intrepid leader Shirley S. Group, Frankie Graham, Becky Bell, Christy Cope, Sylvia Ross, and our military members of the committee, Bill Weiss Group, and Marlena Reckling Murty. Tonight's the first time I've spoken publicly about my experiences in the Vietnam War. I was an Army officer, as Shirley had said, from the autumn of 67 until Christmas 68. I'm trying to get my notes here on the computer. There we go. Most of my Vietnam photos were lost during an assault on my position in May 1968. I found a few and that I sent my family, so I'll do the best I can. There is a wise ancient parable about a group of blind men who have never come across an elephant before, and who learn what an elephant is to them by touching it. Each blind man feels a different part of the body, and then they describe the elephant based on their limited experience. So this presentation isn't meant to be a history lesson. I'm just going to relate an old soldier story, what I saw. Grunt is a slang infantry term for a foot soldier. It became popular during the Vietnam War. Grunts were fewer than 1/3 of the total troop strength that served in Vietnam, but they suffered 87% of the casualties. Grunts leaped out of helicopters into landing zones that were sometimes under fire. They suffered heat, humidity, rain, and insects while straining under the burden of overloaded packs, ammo, and weapons. They endured endless humping up and down mountains, through jungles, and into villages looking for the enemy that were hard to find and tough to fight. All the while being on the lookout for booby traps and ambushes. And for the officer and sergeant grunts, the life and death responsibility for other grunts, and the 7x24 stress that goes with it. There was a military conscription, the draft during the Vietnam War. The enlisted grunts were mostly young, working-class white boys, and a large percentage of black and brown boys. But they came with real-life skills, and that's what grunts need. It was an honor to serve with them, and a valuable life lesson for a young college boy from western Pennsylvania like me. The Combat Infantryman Badge is awarded for performing duties while personally present, under fire while assigned to an infantry unit, engaged in active ground combat. The Combat Infantryman Badge is worn above all other awards and decorations. Out here in the display, one of the blouses has a Combat Medics Badge. That badge is the complement to the Combat Infantryman Badge, and it's for combat medics who accompanied infantry in the field. Americans have been trying to understand the Vietnam War for 55 years now, and in the end, casualty numbers are the cold hard facts they're always left with. 47,434 service members were killed in action. 303,000 service members were wounded in action. And 153,000 of those wounded in action required hospitalization, including me. The Purple Heart Medal is awarded in the name of the President to U.S. military members wounded or killed in action. Reserve Officer Training Classes, ROTC, were mandatory for all freshmen men entering Indiana University of Pennsylvania in 1966. That sounds impossible today, but it was a requirement. And during our freshman year, in the fall, for 13 days, the Soviet Union and the United States came closer than they've ever come to nuclear war, the Cuban Missile Crisis. So I stayed in the ROTC program because it seemed the right thing to do given the Cold War, and because being an Army officer seemed more interesting than being a high school biology teacher, and because ROTC financial stipends for juniors and seniors paid tuition money with some left over for fraternity dues and a better social life. The Vietnam War was not much in the news. During the summer of 1966, I attended jump school and infantry officer training at the infantry school at Fort Benning, Georgia, known as the Benning School for Boys. Jump school was a physically demanding 3-week course that required passing a tougher than normal physical fitness test and completing daily 5-mile runs in combat boots and safely completing 5 training jumps from an airplane. It was a high dropout rate, but the reward was silver parachute wings. I became good friends with another second lieutenant from the 101st Airborne Division, Art Timbo here. We served together in the 101st and then later in Vietnam. The infantry officers training course for newly commissioned second lieutenants was completely changed in 1966. It no longer focused on fighting the Soviet Union on the plains of Europe with tanks and armored personnel carriers. now called the Combat Platoon Leaders Course. It focused on fighting Vietnam style, and it took place mostly in the swamps and the kudzu of the Chattahoochee River that ran through Fort Benning, Georgia. Our instructors began to say, if you don't pay attention to this class, you're going to die in Vietnam. When Art and I returned from Fort Benning to the 101st Airborne Division, we were assigned to the 2nd Battalion of the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment, the Geronimos. Geronimo was our motto. The 501st Parachute Infantry was famous for jumping into Normandy and Holland, shouting Geronimo. And when we saluted a superior officer, we said, Geronimo, sir, ad nauseum. We had a tall carved totem pole in front of our battalion headquarters, and our mascot was a handsome cigar store Indian named Geronimo. And he had parachute wings, a military personnel record, and we saluted. Airborne infantry officers, in addition to all regular infantry officer responsibilities, were responsible for planning, training, and then leading our unit's parachute jumps. To qualify for these additional parachutist responsibilities, we attended Jump Master School, a requirement to become a senior parachutist, which I became. Here's the gap in the photos. After a year as a second lieutenant, rifle platoon leader, Art and I were promoted to first lieutenant as a wartime necessity, and we were reassigned to more senior platoon leader responsibilities. Art led the 2nd of the 501 Battalion Recon Platoon, and I led the 2nd Brigade Long Range Reconnaissance Patrol Platoon, the LRPS. Then Art and I were ordered to the Special Forces School at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, to attend the Special Warfare course to become Vietnamese Army advisors. The Special Warfare course focused on counter-guerrilla tactics, communist military weapons, explosives, demolition, secure radio communications, and advanced first aid, and the Vietnamese language, which when Art and I left for Smoke Bomb Hill at Fort Bragg, we thought we were going to learn to skin and eat snakes, and now we had to go to language school, which was half of the day. Then the Army, in its infinite wisdom, sent us both to advanced Vietnamese language school at the Defense Language Institute in El Paso, Texas. Many nights we studied the Vietnamese language in the tequila bars in Juarez, Mexico. Art and I and several 101st Airborne buddies departed together for Vietnam from Travis Air Force Base in Sacramento, California in the fall of 1967. Now, we had all gone our separate ways to have leave with our families, and we had orders just to show up at Travis and check into the air terminal a certain day at a certain hour, which we did. Dropped our bags and headed for the officers club, and lo and behold, Art and I ran into each other there, and about half a dozen other 101st first lieutenants. So we all flew together from Travis Air Force Base together on a civilian contracted flight that included stewardesses, if you can believe it, and I can't quite remember, but we stopped for fuel a couple of places. It was a long flight. We slept. We arrived in Vietnam at the Tan Son Nhut Air Base near Saigon. And Art and I spent our first night in the old, and I found this on the web, Military Assistance Command Vietnam, MACV, headquarters in Saigon. And the next morning we learned that we had been assigned to the Vietnamese 5th Infantry Division in the 3rd Corps Tactical Zone. MACV headquarters in Saigon was a short stop on our way to combat, but it was memorable. We were packed up and ready to go to our unit, and a chaplain showed up and asked us if we would like to have a church service before we went. So what do you say? Sure, chaplain. So we went into this little room, much smaller than this, and the chaplain had an altar set up, and he had an organ. The Army provides even chaplain equipment. And it was an organ that you pumped with your feet. And then you played the organ, and he played some hymns, and we sang along. And then he led us in the Lord's Prayer, and he gave us communion, and we were going to need it. Welcome to Marlboro country. Back then, a cigarette ad on TV ran, "Welcome to Marlboro country." It showed a tough-looking cowboy smoking a Marlboro standing in the mountains of the American West. GIs picked up on that, saying for Vietnam, areas that were particularly heavy fighting, Marlboro country. And Art and I were headed for Marlboro country. Now, Saigon is in the 3rd Corps Tactical Zone where we were, down here somewhere. And I ended up, now Saigon was the ultimate strategic objective for the enemy, North Vietnam and Viet Cong. They captured Saigon in April 1975, 2 years after the Americans left. Now, to get to Saigon, you had to capture Phu Long province, which is up here. And its capital, Song Bay, where I served in the Phu Long province. It borders Cambodia to the north, and the 2 Corps Tactical Zone, which is the, I almost said the Laurel Highlands, the Central Highlands of Vietnam over here. Neither the Vietnamese army nor the American troops had sufficient troops to control this vast area. Defense of Phu Long, the province depended upon civilian irregular defense groups, CIDG. They were the Regional and Popular Forces, so-called. We call them the Rough Puffs, similar to our National Guard. And they were stationed in little camps, such as Budap here. Bujimop didn't exist. It had been overrun, and General Westmoreland said, we're not going to put a Special Forces camp out there again and get it knocked off. So each of those CIDG camps was advised by a Special Forces A detachment with a quick reaction force, my 3rd Battalion, 9th Regiment, and we were all under the command of Special Forces Detachment B-34 that was located just outside of Song Bay. 3rd and the 9th had been in 2 major actions just before I arrived. One was a brutal fight defending the Loc Ninh Special Forces camp, and one was relieving a sister battalion of the 7th Regiment of the 5th Division that had been nearly overrun in a camp outside Song Bay, and I'll show you a picture of that. Then Daxon, a Montagnard village. The Montagnards are the native Aboriginal people of Vietnam. It was brutally attacked with flamethrowers, and 258 Vietnamese died. I didn't know the big picture even when I left Vietnam, but in the archives of Time magazine, there's a big, they covered the aftermath of the Daxon massacre, and they considered it the worst atrocity that the enemy conducted in Vietnam. There was, at the same time, a strong attack on Song Bay, and 3rd of the 9th was choppered in there to protect Song Bay. A battalion advisory team is made up of a captain and a lieutenant and a number of more senior sergeants. They have specialties of light and heavy weapons, demolitions, radio, communications, and medics. Our team commander was Captain Bill Haley. Bill Haley, during the night of that Song Bay attack, the team's 1st lieutenant was killed in combat, and I was flown in to replace him. Art and I were still back at the 5th Division Advisory Team compound, and General Westmoreland had decreed that all incoming infantry officers go through an in-country orientation. I mean, you had to know how to read the maps in Vietnam, what Universal Transverse Mercator grid area you were in. I was in Yankee uniform. So if you call in coordinates and you don't tell them you're in Yankee uniform, they don't know where you are. And you were supposed to spend a couple of days in the intelligence shop, reading intel reports, spend a couple of days with the operations team in the Tactical Operations Center, reviewing recent contacts. They wanted to make sure, for sure, you knew how to call artillery their style. And then they would bring the person you were going to replace out of the field for a few days, and you'd get to know them, and then you'd go back in. Well, my guy was killed that night. About 3 in the morning, the duty officer reached under my mosquito net, shook my shoulder and said, "You Murty?" I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Shit, shower, and shave, get a double basic load of ammunition, report to the talk at 0500. So that's what I did. When I got to the Tactical Operations Center, it was chaos because they were pretty far south. They were north of Saigon, the 5th Division headquarters and the advisory group. And they didn't know what was going on at Song Bay, more than 100 kilometers away. And so the communications was coming through the 1st Infantry Division's forward operating brigade, and it was confusion. So when I showed up in the talk, I would have never done that to a 1st lieutenant, but you know, a senior NCO handed me 2 frag grenades, and he showed me how to put them on my pack, and told me that the little straps and D-rings that the Army had invented to hold frag grenades were dangerous. So he wrapped each grenade with black electrical tape. That was a lesson. Thank goodness somebody had taken a fresh map, folded it up so it fits in a plastic battery bag, taped it shut so it's waterproof, very generously, they gave me a black grease pencil, so valued, and wrote the radio frequencies and the call signs of my unit, and told me what they knew. They would try to get me in the song base somewhere. So I had on my steel pot. Fortunately, Art and I had both got all of our combat gear ready, had a couple of magazines, and I was ready to go. So went out on the helipad, and some sergeant said to me, here, Lieutenant, here's a red smoke grenade and a yellow smoke grenade. If they put you in the wrong place and it's not, and if it's hot, they're shooting at the helicopters, throw the red smoke. If not, throw the yellow smoke. And we hung them on, so I looked pretty combat ready. So I went out to the little helipad, and the sergeant gave me the first chopper in the morning, and it was we call him a slick. It didn't do anything. It was just like the UPS guy. The thing showed up, and they told him what to do, haul supplies or whatever. So I put my head down under the rotors, and I double timed out there, and the crew chief of the helicopter said, "Oh, Lieutenant, you need to clear your weapon." So I felt like a dummy. So I took a magazine out, pulled the bolt back, put it together, and they put me on a seat in the middle of the helicopter, and it flew way up in the air and headed north. Pretty soon, it landed at the 1st Infantry Division's forward operating base. So it lands, and they tell me, "We're not sure what's going on. We don't recommend putting you in there, but if you, we were ordered to do that, so the next gunship team, 2 gunships fly together, next gunship team comes in, when they get fueled and armed up, we'll put you in there and see if the gunship team can get you into Song Bay." So now these gunships don't just land and you walk over and get in. They're way the heck out there, and they're in all these sandbags, so if the worst happens, you don't get the guys in the bar. So I put my head down, I double timed out there, and these gunships had door gunners, and one of them was a crew chief, and he said to me, "You better lock and load, Lieutenant." So I felt stupid again, and got in there, and we took off, and we flew and flew and flew, and then they said, "I think we can make a pass along the soccer field in Song Bay." And okay, so the right door gunner signaled me to slide over, and there were no seats in there. The whole deck of the helicopter was filled with 50 caliber ammo boxes. So I slid over there, and this guy said to me, put your feet out on the skids." Well, fortunately, I had jumped out of helicopters before, so that's okay. So he held on to me. I put my feet on the skids, and then he said, "We're going to get you on the edge of the soccer field because we think that's where your unit is." And he said, "When I hit you on the helmet, you better step off because that's the lowest and the slowest we're going to get." So that's what I did, and I landed like a ton of bricks, and some big special forces sergeant jumped on me, pushed my head down, and he said, "This ain't the movies, Lieutenant." That's the only war story I'm going to tell. Okay, home sweet home. 3rd of the 9th occupied a forward operating base of FOB 5 miles east of the Special Forces B team. We were in an old French triangular fort, and when we weren't out on an operation, we tried to convert the triangle into a circle. So we're constantly improving the barbed wire outer perimeter, our minefield, sandbag height of our berm, so we walked around, someone didn't have a straight line of sight at you. and putting sandbags and what have you on our hooches will be good. Inside this base camp, Phu Quoc, lived 500 Vietnamese soldiers, plus generations of their families, a labor gang of Vietnamese prisoners, a platoon of former French Foreign Legion paratroopers. I don't know where they came from, but they were great. Montagnards hanging out for various reasons, and the assorted dogs, cats, and lots of rats. Sanitation, as you can imagine, was a major problem, and our mountain yards, we call them yards, our yards, we were warned, carried endemic bubonic plague, leprosy, tuberculosis, and practiced cannibalism. Reminded me of my college anthropology course. We got lots of vaccinations and took lots of pills, and they seemed to work. We were the last outpost before the Cambodian border, and we joked about being the Lost Patrol, a cartoon strip. Excuse me. It was very lonely for us Americans. We were lucky to get mail twice a month, but we were located at the foot of the third highest mountain in Vietnam. It was called Nui Ba Ra. And when it was quiet, which sometimes it was, we all thought it was very beautiful. It's absurd to think at 20, now by the way, I put my age up in the corner of these things.
It's crazy.
Amazing. It's absurd to think a 23-year-old American first lieutenant could advise a Vietnamese battalion commander who had been in combat for most of his adult life. However, we had the radios that called in American firepower and helicopter gunships and medevacs. And American units were always glad to share supplies that the Vietnamese supply system never supplied. We conducted joint American Vietnamese search and destroy operations with every U.S. unit that passed through, 1st Infantry, 11th Armored Cav, 25th Infantry, and others. The 1st Infantry Division, saying this as a paratrooper, about a leg unit. The 1st Division of Big Red 1, we thought they were the best. Major Trois, my battalion commander, saw to it that we had soldier helpers, albeit from the prison platoon, to bring us our meals, get our dirty clothes washed, and clean our living quarters. And we became very fond of these guys. We called them our bodyguards. My bodyguard was named Dang, and he was in prison because he had been an airborne soldier in a unit that participated in a coup against the government. So they threw his butt, and so they didn't have army jails. What they would do was just send you out to an infantry unit. He carried my radio, and much against the rules, I gave him a Thompson submachine gun to carry. He was a tough, loyal soldier, and he always had my back when the shooting started. I'm gonna have to read this from the printing, and I need to get my women also served like in all wars, but in Vietnam, the Vietnamese provided no homes for the soldiers' families, so they lived wherever we were. Before dawn, the women arise, stroke the cooking fires, and prepare the morning meal and pack the food their children's fathers will carry into perhaps their last battle. Sunrise allows the soldiers to remove the minefield from the camp gate and secure a route down to the water point. Women and girls collect water, do the laundry, wash the long black hair, and barter with indigenous Montyards for all manner of animal protein. Boys shirk work to skip stones and play in the Song Bay River. Mothers indulge them, knowing soon they will be apprentices in the family business. The sun is setting, day's combat patrols return. Excuse me. And the children run to the gate to meet their fathers who have returned from the marching and want to march alongside them. Quality time with sons takes the form of teaching them to clean weapons. And when the enemy brings the battle to the 3rd Battalion of the 9th Regiment of the 5th Infantry Division, it brings it to the family abode, such as it is, and there is hell on earth. Excuse me. Our advisory team was never more than half strength, and we were officially authorized 8, 2 officers and 6 sergeants. The theory was that you could divide the team into 2, one on offense and one to stay back at the forward operating base for defense and to continue training. But in 1968, it was the most casualty-intense year, and replacements were scarce. The official organization didn't take into account the never-ending job of scrounging supplies, food, ammunition, replacement weapons, and the many kinds of things necessary to run your home, the things we get at Home Depot today. So our Staff Sergeant Huffman, the old man of our team, was constantly begging helicopter rides from passing American units and searching American supply depots for the necessities of life. However, we did have a wealth of trading material. In Vietnam, you could trade an American unit for almost anything in exchange for a captured Chinese communist pistol, an AK-47 assault rifle, a Montagnard crossbow, and I'm among friends here now, right? The Montagnards did hunt with crossbows, and they were good, but we discovered that we could pay the Montagnards to make extra crossbows that we could trade as trading material. So, and we had lots of Viet Cong flags. So we did a lot of trading. Staff Sergeant Johnson was a genius at keeping our Korean War era. The Vietnamese Army was equipped with Korean War era weapons when I was there. He was a crack shot with every weapon and tactically very proficient with a compass and a map, an essential skill. He was in superb physical shape and very strong, and the little Vietnamese kids, yes, we had little kids in our camp, they loved to ride around on his shoulders. He loved kids, dogs, cats, and he kept a parrot. He could communicate better in Vietnamese than I could, and he was the best representative of America to the Vietnamese he came in contact with. He was the best of us at training Vietnam's soldiers. And he was the only member of our advisory team that wasn't wounded or killed. Len Bessling, Staff Sergeant Len Bessling, he was our senior sergeant, believe it or not. That made him our team sergeant, 3rd in command, even though the position called for a master sergeant EA. Len was a serious, no-nonsense infantryman, and we had great confidence in his judgment under fire. After I was wounded in medevac, Len was the last advisor to the battalion until a couple days later he was wounded. He showed great leadership, and he should have gone to officer candidate school. But he knew what was going on, and as soon as he got home, he left the Army. In these past two photos, NCOs are carrying modern M79 grenade launchers, and I'm carrying a Korean War M2 carbine with a banana magazine. Sergeant Huffman scrounged from American units enough M79 grenade launchers that every squad had one. Really increased our firepower. And he scrounged up cases and cases of something called the M72 light anti-tank weapon, a long, which is about this long, and you pushed a button and extended it out, and it was ready to fire. The sights popped up, and you just put something in the sights or not, and pulled the trigger, and boom, out went a pretty powerful. And they were very lightweight, and good old Sergeant Huffman. We had enough of these, and the Vietnamese loved them. So we were going out on a combat patrol. It's almost every guy had a couple of them. In the past two photos, they're carrying American weapons, and I've got a 30 caliber carbine. Had a 30 round banana magazine and a lever to switch it on to full automatic. And these rounds were more powerful than a .357 Magnum handgun, and much more powerful than the Army issue M1911 45 caliber pistol U.S. Army issue. Len Bessling and I worked as an independent team several times in the spring of '68 when the fighting was intense. And 3rd of the 9th deployed a rapid reaction force back to Son Bay. We air assaulted a reinforced rifle company back into the Son Bay soccer field. Deja vu all over again for me. To take back a Vietnamese Ranger compound that had been overrun. It was my first time calling in napalm. Over my tactical radio, I could talk to a forward air controller, and I could hear him talking to the jets. And didn't give me confidence that those guys knew precisely where the target I'd given was. While Len and I were deployed to Song Bay that time, one of the sergeants on our team was killed defending our base camp. Captain Haley really took that one hard. Zipping up body bags is traumatic. I can testify to it. He requested to be relieved, and nobody criticized him. Suddenly, I was in command. In case you're, some of you combat veterans have noticed here, I'm not in uniform in these snapshots. Here I am, returning a mortar round to the enemy. These are daytime photos. The first lieutenant's job was to run the night shift. Maintain radio contact with our B-34 Song Bay and with any artillery units that were in the area. When the sun set, I was in combat dress with fresh batteries in the radios, and I had radioed pre-positioned targets for our artillery units, so we didn't have to call a fire mission and have them adjust and whatever, just say, target so-and-so, fire for effect. And I had my M2 carbine with me all the time. The North Vietnamese began closing on Saigon through the district town of Thuc Binh that was only about a mile from the Special Forces B detachment. And 3rd of the 9th got orders to abandon the compound we were in and move into Phuc Long, which was a district town You know how Pittsburgh's in Allegheny County, so there's a county seat, and it's not the Pittsburgh's, well, the same thing there. So Phu Quoc province, Song Bay is the capital, and Song Bay is within this Phu Quoc district. And the district had some regional force, popular force soldiers, and it was a fairly big town, maybe 1,000 people. And the district chief lived in a fortified compound. And so we displaced 3rd of the 9th into that compound. Then a large force of Vietnamese, North Vietnamese, attacked Phu Binh one night, and they overran a company of ours that we had deployed out in the town, reinforcing the Vietnamese reserve forces out there. Our battalion commander, Major Trois, had a tough choice to make. And he courageously chose to counterattack out through the gate to try to relieve this company. And I have to admit, I realized they were toast. And it was a bitter all-night fight, small arms, and it was touch and go until B-34 said enough of that, and they declared Phu Quoc a free fire zone. Now this is kind of an in the weeds thing about Vietnam, but in the most recent wars we've had in the Middle East, you might read about rules of engagement. No, you can't. You know, our rule of engagement was don't shoot the little yellow people inside the compound, but shoot the little yellow people outside the compound. But Phu Quoc, Phu Binh was declared a free fire zone, and B-34 had some gunships, and they just leveled the place. During that action, we had taken a lot of dead and wounded, and a very, very brave medevac pilot, under fire, came in and started hauling out our wounded. We grabbed some machetes and macheted down all of our antennas, threw sandbags over all of the wire, and this guy landed on one of our hooches. It was amazing. On the second trip in, I was carrying a wounded Vietnamese soldier to the chopper. And by the way, one of the badly wounded Vietnamese was that Captain Hoy, who you saw with his wife in the picture. And while I was carrying this guy to the chopper, some round came in and I was wounded. I don't even remember. I came to and they had dragged me into a bunker. Dusted off. I'm going to try to show a short video here, if I can get this to work. We owe an enormous debt of gratitude to the nurses and the corpsmen who served in Vietnam. At least as grunts, we were out in the field, you know, we were trying to kill people. And they were trying to kill us, so fair fight. But the nurses, all they got were the wounded guys. And frankly, I don't know how they did it. So
there were fans blowing both ends, and every bed was full. It was unbelievable. I was an operating room nurse where everything is clean and sterile and organized and neat. It was pure chaos. There were patients on every table. There was blood everywhere, everywhere. People were slipping in it. They were just blown to pieces. I can still smell the smells. The smell is one thing, the sound is another. The noise of a lot of people yelling, patients yelling, surgeons yelling, corpsmen yelling. Your Lieutenant Aducci, go over to that table. GI on the table, he had a sheet over him, and it was just soaked in blood. They took the sheet off, and his leg was just sort of hanging there with, just by a tendon or something, with the boot attached. They just handed me, you know, a razor and said, okay, prep him, which meant shave as much hair off, but in the meantime, could you just lob that leg off while you're at it? I kept thinking, oh, I can handle this. I've handled huge car accidents. I've handled gunshot wounds. I can do this. This is no problem. But to just see this never-ending line of bodies out the door, and we worked like that for probably 24 hours, and then it was over. Now we're done. Now we hose down the floor. So that was my first day.
Wow. Fortunately, back in Buklong, as the sun was coming up and the shooting stopped, Special Forces medics showed up, and they're highly trained. They're like physician's assistants today. And he got me up to the B team. He bandaged me really well, gave me a shot of morphine. And the next chopper out of the Special Forces camp took me south to the 1st Infantry Division Forward Operating Base. I think that's the one I went in 6 months before. This chopper wasn't a medevac chopper, so it left me off at the helipad, and it was just before 7 in the morning, 0700, and amazing to me. So I got off the chopper and I had used my rifle as a cane. I'm hobbling around, and lo and behold, there was a chow line, and I must have looked really horrifying. So the chow line parted, and nothing looked good to me except coffee and, in the GI version of a Yeti cooler, a Marty can, you remember those? There was dry ice and ice cream blocks. So I, standing there with ice cream and a cup of coffee, and a military surgeon, a captain, and 2 medical corpsmen came running up, and the captain ordered me to surrender my weapon and get on the stretcher. And then he said, "Have you had any morphine?" And I said, "No." So I wasn't feeling any pain. Now, they did call in a medevac chopper called a dust off. And he flew me down to the 3rd Surge, I think. Because my field bandage was so well done, when they take you off the chopper, they take you into the surgical area of the hospital, but there's something called the triage area. And they look at you, and if you don't look too bad, you go back to the line. So you have to wait there while all these other guys are, and if you're not going to make it, they have a little area they take you aside, and that's where the chaplain is. So you saw that video, and that's pretty much with the bark on. 3rd Surge stopped the bleeding, trimmed off the dead flesh, cleaned my wound, and left my wound open. Are there any nurses here? Is Danny here? Who's a nurse? So anyway, you know, they don't sew up these wounds right away. They let them open. They're concerned if there's something else serious, and so I had to wait around in the 3rd Surge for a while to see if I had any nerve damage. Well, I didn't. If I had, that would have been my career, and they would have sent me to Japan. So I was transferred to the 3060 VAC Hospital, which is famous because it's in Vungtao, which is right on the South China Sea. Now, military medicine, you can say what you want, but they really got their stuff together. The nurse comes by the first day and changes your bandage. And then the next time, a corpsman comes and he said, yo, watch what I'm doing. And then he changes my bandage, and then he says to me, yo, watch what I'm doing. And he shows me how to change that guy's. And from then on, you do it for each other. And it has a great psychological effect. So after a while, it's like, yeah, it's not too bad. And then they come along and they say, hey, would you like to take a shower? Sure. So they give you some plastic and some tape, and you wrap yourself up and you go in the shower, and they give you a clean set of those blue hospital pajamas. Right away, they say, hey, can you go to the latrine by yourself? Oh, sure. Who wants to go in a bedpan? And then they say, do you think you could go to the chow hall yourself? Sure. So at Vungtao, went there very long, and the Red Cross Recreation Services volunteers, these are college girls, right out of college, who volunteer for the Red Cross and come to Vietnam. And we call them donut dollies, which is a term of affection from World War II. They found us swim trunks and sunglasses, Ray-Ban knockoffs. I look like young Joe Biden. Then we could get on the bus and go to the beach. So went to the beach each morning. So you get up, change bandages, everything's okay, yeah, have some chow. Got to wait around because the surgeon's got to look at you. And then get in the bus and go to the beach. And when you get off the bus, some little Vietnamese, about that tall entrepreneur takes you by the hand, and he's got a beach chair and an umbrella set up and a little plastic beach rug, and he takes care of you all day long. At lunchtime, he runs up to the PX, it's like a food truck, and gets you a burger and french fries and a cold Coke. And then in the middle of the afternoon, you got money, yeah? And he runs down to town and gets you a Ba Mui Bao. You remember the Vietnamese beer, 333? It was actually pretty good. The French taught them how to make beer. It's one thing they did right. After several weeks, the surgeon stitched up my leg, and I was released, and casualties were so high that uniforms were in short supply. So I left the hospital with a bandaged right leg, pair of crutches, one flip-flop, oversized jungle fatigues, and no hat. So back at the 5th Infantry Division Advisory Team, I went to work as a combat operations officer, one of those officers in the Tactical Operations Center who's, you know, been to the goat rodeo a few times, until my leg healed. And because of my combat experience and I knew what an airplane was, they made me the Air Combat Operations Officer in G3. Part of my job was to fly over units that were in combat and take over controlling the artillery and the gunships, things like that, so the poor sucker on the ground could pay attention to shooting the enemy. I flew in an Army 01 Bird Dog, there it is, with a young First Lieutenant Pilot Rusty O'Connor. We were supposed to fly to where the action was and mark targets with yellow smoke rockets. They were 2.75-inch rockets with a high explosive nose, warhead on the front that just had smoke. And they were launched out of aluminum tubes under each wing of the airplane. But Rusty's aviation commander wasn't much for Army regulations, so we loaded ours with high explosive white phosphorus rockets and sometimes a machine gun hanging under one bomb shackle, and we had the capability of dropping magnesium aluminum flares. Really dangerous. So you're flying around, they're shooting at you, and you got these flares. But anyway, that makes a unit in combat's night. If you can hold the enemy for like up in the woods where we are, 20, 30 minutes, we could usually get someone overhead. And when they drop that magnesium flare and night turns into day, I mean, it's a whole different battle. It was the most satisfying job I ever had. Back in the day, there was a thing called the 8-track tape. And Rusty had a Sony 8-track boombox. And the radios in the planes, they had this thing called squelch control so that you could talk over each other. And so when we would take off, we would gain a lot of altitude, and those O1s with a lot of ordnance hanging under the wings, doesn't climb very fast. But we would often patrol at night for 4 hours, or as long as it could hold the head fuel. If somebody called for help, Rusty could just come on that coordinate, drop the nose a little bit. We were way up there, maybe 3,000 to 4,000 feet, and the old plane would start to shake, come up to its maximum speed, and would be over the unit as fast as we could. And he would reach down and hit the tape of Sam and Dave, their tune, "Hold on, I'm coming." And that was a tremendous morale boost, so the guys on the ground told us. This graph tells the story of our 10-year experience in Vietnam. It's a perfect bell curve. Misguided intentions until the Tet Offensive, and then bloody disengagement until the Vietnam War had become too much to bear for the American people. 1968 was the deadliest year of the Vietnam War. 16,899 combat deaths occurred. 30% of the total of 10 years in that 1 year. To put that into perspective, and a grunt understands this, that's 47 dead GIs a day, 325 a week, and 1,400 a month in 1968. It's a lot of body bags, and a lot of flag-covered coffins coming back to the United States for Americans to watch on TV every night. Wars have consequences. My friend Art was killed the 1st of February, 68 during the Tet Offensive. I didn't learn about it for months. Back at my advisory headquarters, they didn't know we were close friends. Art's son Brian sent me that he had a baby and one on the way when he went to Vietnam. His son Brian sent this photo of his grandson at his grave at the military cemetery Presidio of San Francisco. This is a list of the Ligonier Valley soldiers killed in combat. Most were 19 years old. Most died in 67, which doesn't surprise me in a way. They were all in American units, and 67 was when American units were learning the drill. Most were privates, privates first class. 4 were Army, and 3 were Marines. and there's a copy of this hanging in the hall. And I'd be happy to take questions. Anyone, how many Vietnam veterans we got here? A couple? Oh, all right, good. I know you were a U-11 Charlie?
Yeah, I was 11B.
You were 11B,
Yeah,
riding around on a 113.
armored personnel carrier.
All right, yeah, we had those, and were you in a mech unit or a CAS squadron? Did you have M48s?
I was in a infantry scout unit, recon, which sounds like it's crazy, you know, recon in the track. But we were in the 4th Division of Central Highlands, mostly on Highway 14 and 19, Highway 511, 38, just south of Ben Het and just north of Bambi Tuit. Most of the time I was in the field almost 11 months. And we got the opportunity to be on the tracks about 80% of the time. 20% of the time we grunted. But we supported fire bases, bridges at night for security, LZs, everything anybody else didn't want to do. But usually we were rocket magnets. And so we got a lot of casualties from rockets more than small arms fire. And then the mines and, you know, all of the negative parts of the war. But in 2 Corps, in the Central Highlands, you were right, there were times when it was quiet. And it looked like the Laurel Highlands. It looked like Waterford. And I was totally amazed how within seconds it could change. But yeah, I want to say one thing about the mountain yards. They were the indigenous people, as you said, and they were our friends. They were our allies. And they have a village set up in South Carolina, North Carolina, I think it is. There's about 2,500 of them there that they came over. And they are real people. And they loved us. And they served us thinking that we are going to provide them with freedom to choose their leaders and to vote and to pattern their government after ours. They were really sincere people. And I thought we were doing that too. We never killed women, we never killed babies.
Well, thank you for that. Any other questions? Any pretty quiet in here? Okay, well, Shirley, thank you so much.
Monty,
Yeah,
that was wonderful.